caucus. There's a lot of obviously bright people within the public service. There's a lot of bright people in the stakeholder groups. Why wouldn't you talk to them?
That one is interesting. The Premier was asked again Wednesday whether, having cancelled the tax cut, they would also put the reorganization on hold. No, full steam ahead. But my sense, from what I've seen, from within the public service is they can say full steam ahead all they want, but the public service is close to paralysis, and 6 ministries affected, right? It's not just one ministry. It's all the resource, land, environment, and First Nations ministries all together we've been pulled apart like a bunch of tinker toys and stuck back together again, and nobody's really sure if this is the right way to do it.
No, that's right. And I mean, I know that at the time that this happened and the time that I originally spoke out, I think some people were focusing on the fact that, you know, that mining was moved from my ministry to a different ministry. That's not what it's about. I mean, I as energy minister, I had lots to do. It was a great ministry, and for me to give it up, to be able to say what I think wasn't an easy thing to do, and I'm going to miss the work. But it wasn't about, you know, moving mining from one ministry to another ministry. It was, you know, what is the rationale? What is the plan for this? And I did attend a couple of meetings with the folks at the 2 deputies, and I did not get comfort at all, and I know colleagues did not get comfort at those meetings. I believe personally the thing that ought to be done is they should roll back all the changes in the natural resource ministries, put everything back where they were, keep the Ministry of Natural Resource Operations, if you want to call it that, it's a name, keep Steve Thompson in charge of that. He's a very good man. I have a lot of respect for Steve, and let him perform a planning function over the next year. Let him take a year to talk to all the people that I just suggested should have been talked to, and figure out if we want to do this integration and make decision-making more effective in government, talk to some people, figure it out. A year later, come back to Cabinet and to caucus, not just to Cabinet, but to caucus, and say, this is how we think we can do this. Wouldn't that make a lot more sense?
We got a few questions for you on the mining front. I'd like to talk a little bit about this one because you're a member from a part of the province where a lot of our resource revenue comes from, and I think you've tried at times to sort of get people in the big cities that spend all the money that come from the resource industries to think about where the revenues are coming from. And here's a project that is in serious trouble, possibly even dead, with a question about it. Doug MacArthur, here he is.
The Prosperity Mine in the Caribou region is causing a great deal of concern. Your government says that it favors the mine. In the face of the major opposition from First Nations, why not sit down and negotiate an accommodation and an agreement with the First Nations before proceeding any further with this mine?
Do you know how this one got 17 years down the road without the First Nations being on side?
I have some idea how this sort of thing happens. I was Minister of State for Mining in 2005 through 2007. I recall having conversations with the proponents, and at the time the proponents saying to me, well, Bill, you know, we're fine with the First Nations. The First Nations are looking forward to this project. They're going to get jobs, and I don't think that the work had been done at the time, neither by the proponent or the government. I think the suggestion that we should sit down with the First Nations is a legitimate suggestion. I do have to say in defense of the ministers involved in this that there was a lot of effort to do that. We did say publicly that there would be revenue sharing available for the First Nation. There's a mandate, a cabinet mandate, to share revenue on new mines, and it's substantial. So there is that, but this is, you know, for First Nations folks, it often is not about the money. It's about what they see as a disrespectful use of land, and land that they hold dear, and so it takes time to work through that sort of thing. I do think that at some point governments, duly elected governments, have to make decisions. We did make a decision on that one. We supported the mine. There is no court in the land that has said that First Nations have a veto over projects on Crown land, and we never say that publicly, but I think you have to say it every now and again because it's true. I actually think the province did the right thing by approving the mine. I'm disappointed that the federal government didn't seem to have the courage to make the same decision.
Another mining question, Jock Finlayson, where are we headed on mining in British Columbia? John Horgan mentioned on the show last week that copper prices are at a record level, but we're not doing an awful lot of new mines. So here's Jock.
The province took a very strong position in favor of the proposed Prosperity Mine, which was approved under the provincial environmental assessment process. Unfortunately, that project was turned down by the Government of Canada. Are you concerned in the wake of that mineral exploration and development spending in BC could die off as companies conclude it's too difficult to open and permit a new mine here?
Is it that risky? I mean, are we that close to that problem of a backlash?
I think we're close to that. I do want to point out to Jock that, you know, we approved the New Afton mine, we approved the Copper Mountain mine, we approved the Mount Milligan mine, and we also approved the Prosperity mine. We have also approved the Red Chris mine, which is in the northwest. It kind of goes a little bit to the criticism that we were having difficulty making decisions, doesn't it, when you've approved that many mines provincially. I do think with the Prosperity...
All held up by federal approval?
No, actually, Red Chris has its full approval. Mount Milligan has its full approval. So does New Afton. So does Copper Mountain. So it's really just Prosperity that...
Okay.
And I shouldn't say just Prosperity. It's in an area of the province where they really need the jobs. The non-First Nations people who live there in Williams Lake and 100 Mile House and Quesnel really want this project to go ahead. The province wanted it to go ahead. I think that if there was a principle that the federal government could point to, investors would say, okay, well, there's a principle there that the federal government relied upon to make this decision to say no. I think we're all struggling right now to really determine what that principle was, other than, the First Nation doesn't want it, and fair enough. It's going to have an impact on the environment. Our environmental assessment process said that it was going to have a negative impact on the environment. Our assessment process takes into account not only environmental implications, but social implications, community implications, and economic implications. The federal process does not.
But I would say, just looking at it from a political point of view, that if the First Nation is on side, you can probably deal with the environmental concerns. But if the First Nation isn't, asking the federal government to override both, it's a lot harder to override both. If you've got one, you can usually deal with the other. But it's very hard if you don't have the First Nation to overcome the environmental objections.
Well, you're clearly...
That's political reality.
You're clearly correct.
And that's just the political reality in British Columbia. I agree with you what the court decisions say about a veto. And the Supreme Court of Canada specifically said there isn't a veto. But political reality, I don't know. If I were going in to do something that had an environmental backlash, I'd like the local native band to be on my side rather than opposed to me.
Well, government works pretty hard, actually, to make sure that First Nations do have opportunities through the projects that happen on Crown land. I know as Minister of Energy, I worked, I've just had meetings yesterday with two large First Nations in the province in the Northwest, and we do work pretty hard to make sure that First Nations have an opportunity to benefit from whatever is being proposed on Crown land, and you can't win them all. There are certain situations where, the people aren't simply going to agree.
So within the current 24-hour news cycle that we're doing this, you were still energy minister, so I think I can ask you about fracking, because fracking came up last week, and I suspect it's a term British Columbians are just starting to learn if they've heard it. So what's fracking, and should we be worried about it?
Fracking is a process that's used by the oil and gas industry to enable gas and oil to release underground so that it'll flow to the surface. Fracking relates specifically to northeastern BC, where we have a huge shale gas, or what's known as unconventional gas opportunity. The gas is trapped in rock formations, in shale formations and sandstone formations, and it won't flow unless you're able to somehow or other expand the seams and crack the rock. You basically explode the rock in some ways underground. So the way you do that is you go straight down, and we're not talking 500 feet. You go down maybe close to a mile or half a mile, and then they have what's known as directional drilling, and the drills actually begin to bend. These are straight steel rods, and they begin to bend. It actually is amazing how it works, and they bend like
what won't they think of next?
And then these drills go out for literally 10 kilometers in some cases, and so what they have to do then, once they've done that drilling, is they have to pump water under pressure and sand, a very, very fine sand that they actually truck in from places like Minnesota and Wisconsin all the way to the Horn River Basin and Fort Nelson. And they pump this water under pressure, great pressure, and this sand into these drill holes, and they try and explode the rock so that the gas will flow. The criticism of that in places where it's not
well,
that...
I'm going to stop you, and we're
Okay.
going to get to the criticism, because that's the best description I've ever heard of what they do. And hold that image in your mind, and we will take a brief break and come back with Bill Bennett. Stay with us.
The Liberal Party now has a leadership contest coming up, and for the 10th time in a row at least, it is looking increasingly unlikely that anybody outside the Lower Mainland or Victoria will have much of a shot at attaining the leadership of a provincial party. It's not clear to me that, given the structures of the NDP and the Liberals, that a person from rural or northern British Columbia will ever be the leader of a provincial party in our province.
Producing over 9,000 hours of local programming every year. This is Shaw TV, your local voice.
Can you imagine that today, these beautiful animals are at risk of being unnecessarily slaughtered for their meat, for profit? Almost 100,000 horses are killed in Canadian slaughterhouses every year. Please visit traxcanada.ca and find out what Trax is doing to protect horses and how you can help keep them in safe pastures.
Miss something on Voice of BC? Catch an encore presentation of this show on your local Shaw TV. If you live in the Lower Mainland, Voice of BC rebroadcasts Saturday morning at 10:30 and Sunday afternoon at 4. On Vancouver Island, watch Voice of BC Saturday at 10 a.m. or Sunday afternoon at 2. To find out when Voice of BC rebroadcasts in all other parts of the province, please contact your local Shaw TV or check the TV listings for your area.
Whether you like it or not, crystal meth and drug abuse is out there. The Crystal Meth Prevention Society is devoted to educating and supporting our children in preventing drug abuse. Over 20,000 students on Vancouver Island have seen our Be Crystal Clear Meth info show, but we need your help to continue to offer this drug awareness program. Please donate via our website and help make a difference. The Crystal Meth Prevention Society. Education, prevention, care. Be crystal clear.
The cult of personality that we've been afflicted with in BC for 2 decades, my entire adult life, where you've had these dominant individuals, whether they be within the Socreds, the NDP, or Gordon Campbell, I don't believe is really what we need here in British Columbia. A moment of calm for the voters and just good, compassionate government is what we need, and Carol provides that.
Welcome back to Voice of BC. Next week on the show, we're going to do a special show on British Columbia's water and endangered water and a lot of water quality issues, and we've got Ben Parfit on. And so I actually got a question from Ben on tape about use of water resources by industry in British Columbia, and I'm going to use that to go back into the discussion of fracking, because Bill Bennett was about to discuss what he thinks is the environmental issue with fracking. So let's start with the Ben, and then we'll go back to the other bits. So here's Ben Parfit.
British Columbia is leading Canada right now in terms of shale gas developments, and hundreds of millions of dollars are flowing into provincial coffers as a result. But the environment may be paying a very, very steep price for all of this development, in particular with the huge amounts of water that are required in these operations. I'm wondering, in your estimate, whether it makes sense for the Oil and Gas Commission to be responsible for giving energy companies access to water, or if that authority more properly rests with the Provincial Ministry of Environment.
So we're talking huge amounts of water here?
Yeah, I can tell you that I had come to the conclusion, I've had the job of Minister of Energy, or had the job as Minister of Energy for 4 or 5 months, and I'd come to the conclusion that water was the big issue in the Northeast, and will be the big issue, you know, over the next several years, because it takes such large quantities of water to not only deal with unconventional gas or